In the dilapidated ruins and hollow winds, we find the remnants of once thriving communities. There are holes littered all over the world in the shapes of abandoned villages and ghost towns. Number 10. Our journey begins in 1910 when Pyramiden was founded in the middle of Svalbard. Its name stemmed from the pyramid-shaped peak that looms over the town. This landscape serves as a sharp contrast between the harsh Arctic scene and the Soviet background that the place would go on to have. It was initially created as a mining village, but in 1927 it was sold to the Soviet Union. Now the buildings stand abandoned, the machinery left to rust, and the infrastructure in a state of disrepair. Pyramiden coal mines had never been very profitable in the first place, but when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the town met a decline. A shortage of citizens, low salaries, and poor living standards characterized the demise. And if that wasn't bad enough, amidst the money troubles, another tragedy struck the village in 1996. Flight 2801 had been approaching the Svalbard airport after departing from Moscow. Upon its approach, though, the unexpected happened, and the plane plummeted from the sky, crashing down. It was a fatal crash, and following the incident, some of the victims' families would pursue lawsuits against the company, causing the mining town to hit an all-time low. The collision led the workforce and companies of Pyramiden into tough times, which would also lead to closing down one of the settlements there. In order to keep the town on its feet, large investments would have to be made to continue the mining, but by this time, the Russian government was unsteady, and the investments never took place. Strangely though, another mining hub was Barentsburg, located nearby, which didn't meet any such troubles or the threat of becoming a ghost town, a fact that has led to much speculation. Barentsburg did have more coal at the time, but some suggest that the internal politics had something to do with keeping the village going. By the following year, the decision had become final. On the 31st of March 1998, the very last bit of coal was taken from the mine, and the last 300 people who lived there began to ship out. They departed by boatload or helicopter, which took these last remaining residents to other nearby towns. On the 10th of October that year, the last residents departed, and the town was up and gone. Pyramiden was left littered with coal mining debris, steel girders, and rusted materials that jutted around from odd angles. The mining buildings were collapsed in great mounds of rubble, mimicking an apocalyptic scene. Neglected railways scarred deep into the hillside, allowing the Stalinist-style buildings to stand in grim uniformity. What was once a bustling mining village was left to wither away, turning into a Cold War thriller scene, an Arctic ghost town. Number 9. Bannack, Montana fits the description of a ghost town quite well, and it certainly harbors a variety of ghost stories. It was founded in 1862 when a couple of Pikes Peakers set up camp there. They'd come from the gold fields of Colorado and were looking for a place to rest when they stumbled upon Grasshopper Creek, the creek infested with grasshoppers. It was also here that they discovered some gold, but failed to keep this discovery a secret. When fall rolled around, the little settlement had swelled to house more than 400 heads, many of which were not prepared for the harsh winter that would come. The founders dubbed the town Bannack after the Native Americans who'd previously lived in the area. The following year, the town saw a spark in population growth to 5,000. It didn't take long for Bannack to become overwhelmed with ladies of the night, gang violence, and the well-known sheriff outlaw Henry Plummer. Plummer's gang robbed southwest Montana before the formation of the Vigilance Committee that eradicated the sheriff and his group of offenders. The life of the town was short-lived because of the gold rush that had struck and faded out by 1864. It first began to lose its importance following the establishment of Virginia City, and then Helena. The value of gold slowly started to dwindle, as did Bannack's population. It would only officially become a ghost town in the 1960s, after which the decay set in. The buildings were emptied, and the wood that made up the houses was weathered, but ghosts still walked the streets. The town's log and wood frame houses began to sag, the porches aged, the windows cracked, and the streets were left dusty. While it may seem lonely to walk the roads there, many recall the historical legend of Dorothy Dunn. She was alleged to have met her demise in 1916, and ever since she's been spotted in windows wearing a blue dress. Dorothy was also spotted in Hotel Mead, the focal point of many of the paranormal stories that surround this dilapidated village. The spirit is also said to communicate with the children of visitors and tourists. An older woman, believed to be Dorothy's mother, also makes an appearance, peering from the hotel's windows at the intruders. Many have reported feeling unexplained cold spots around Hotel Mead. EMF readings and other fluctuations have also been picked up here by paranormal investigators who inspect this supposedly empty hotel. Bannack had once been the star of Montana, a place of glinting gold that now lies in decay and is the subject of strange ghost stories. The old saloons no longer hum with tunes, and the town's 5,000 residents no longer wander the boardwalks. Instead, the inhabitants have been replaced by the whir of voiceless winds, and the buildings have become damp and distorted. Bannack is also one of the liveliest abandoned towns, as it offers ghost tours and remains a vibrant attraction for tourists. Number 8. We now find ourselves at Six Flags New Orleans in Louisiana, a place that once gleamed with the excitement of a bustling amusement park. Today, it resembles a scene from a forgotten nightmare. The landscape, once a playground for children and thrill seekers, is now overgrown, choking the remains of children's rides. The intrusion of alligators and boars adds a surreal touch to the scene. The misplaced smiles of moldy Looney Tunes characters, now a grim reminder of the joy they once brought, seem to blend in with the skeletal remains of roller coasters and the forlorn look on the remaining sides. Six Flags opened its doors in May of 2000 under the name Jazzland. Its story begins in 1983, though, when the Art Deco Pontchartrain Beach theme park closed its doors after operating for 55 years. The next closest park was 350 miles away, but two real estate developers, Tom and Diane Houston, had extraordinary visions for building a closer attraction on 220 acres of land that they owned. Jazzland honored the history of the area, including the music and Pontchartrain Beach. But a theme park would take quite some time to be built, as investors would regularly pull out after showing interest in the task. Jazzland saw a great fanfare when it opened its doors, but there was a decline by the following year. This was due to the lack of water rides, canopies, and other shaded areas that the visitors could use to escape the sweltering sun. 2 years later, bankruptcy allowed Six Flags to snatch up the lease, and $20 million worth of improvements were added. In 2003, the park reopened under the title Six Flags New Orleans. Another 2 years went by, and Six Flags was underperforming, which would ultimately cause a closure later. But instead, Hurricane Katrina blew in and barred straight for New Orleans. The theme park staff closed for the weekend, and a closed for storm sign was erected, a sign that still stands there today. The city is situated below sea level and is protected by levees up to 23 feet tall, but these defenses were not a match against the Category 5 storm. Water from a nearby lake poured into the city, and 80% of New Orleans became submerged. The amusement park, though, had been built upon a 4-foot elevation in an effort to reduce flooding, but unfortunately the drainage pumps failed, and the 220 acres were drowned in salt water. Eventually, the water receded, but the damage had already been done. The cleanup for the park would prove too expensive to fix. Some wooden structures were utterly destroyed, and the integrity of the rides was compromised. Since Six Flags had already been failing to meet expectations, finding an investment for the repairs would prove futile. A long battle ensued for the city to terminate the 75-year lease. Both parties were hoping for an insurance payout, but this never came. The park's insurance policy excluded damage caused by flooding as a whole. The years went on, and any attempt to repurpose the site fell short. The plans for a Nickelodeon Universe water park were denied, and the ideas of a hotel, movie studio, and a mall all fell through. Then, in 2021, the Bayou Phoenix Company granted redevelopment and gained control of the property in 2023. Costs ranged from between $500 million to $1 billion to convert the dilapidated park into other attractions. News on such development has since been scarce, and the fairgrounds were forgotten. Number 7. Hidden in the twisting branches of the Patapsco Valley State Park are the remains of St. Mary's College. It was erected in 1868 and took on a liberal arts heritage. The school's student body, though, slowly began to fade until there just wasn't enough to keep it going. In 1972, the facility was completely abandoned and left empty for urban explorers and teenagers to take charge of. Over time, the college became overgrown, aged, and damaged. It also became the home of legends and ghost stories. These stories range from the satanic cult meeting grounds to places of restless souls. It eventually earned the name Hell House, remaining perfectly intact until 1997, when a mysterious fire took a life of its own. Following this event, the scene worsened. The bricks were charred and crumbling, and the windows shattered, leaving holes in the hollowed shells. Due to the circulating stories of hauntings, visitors became plentiful. In an attempt to deter the trespassers, the owner of the property made use of guard dogs and police. It's also this caretaker that's the source of numerous rumors. Some say he lived in a nearby abandoned house and used not only his hounds but also firearms to keep everyone at bay. Luckily for us, some brave explorers were able to snap pictures and recount what they saw at St. Mary's. Ruins like old foundations and concrete staircases litter the grounds. An altar adds an eeriness from beneath the pavilion, and a metal cross sits beneath a faux classical dome. Most of the main buildings were torn down, but this single gazebo was left standing. Hell House has become the central point of conspiracy theories and creepy stories, but the eeriest part of this abandoned place is its roots, which can be tracked down to Ellicott City. In the 1800s, after the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was opened, a man named George Ellicott opened a hotel in Ilchester. The idea was to be able to give travelers a place to stay while bolstering the town's economic growth. Unfortunately, though, the hotel was not a success, and it was sold to the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer in 1866. The congregation ultimately built St. Mary's College, which ran until its closure, with only 10 students left in the graduating class. In the late 80s, the real reason behind the school's closure began to circulate. It's said that one of the priests, possibly involved with the congregation, fatally attacked students at the Patapsco Female Institute. Others state that another priest had also been engaged in misconduct but escaped prosecution. Some report a distinct feeling that there's something wrong with St. Mary's, with no particular historical reasoning behind it. Adding to the eeriness was the fire, as previously mentioned. The flames dismantled more of the structural remains. It came the morning after Halloween, only allowing more rumors to spark and spread throughout the town. Stories like disembodied voices echoing from the ruins and fleeting figures wandering the forests that surround Hell House are told around the campfires. St. Mary's City was Maryland's original capital after being settled in 1634, making it one of the oldest settlements in the country. The city would also be abandoned and eventually vanish entirely. Foundations, graves, roads, and old artifacts rest beneath the farmlands and wilderness. Given the destruction that the city and the college have endured, it's no surprise that ghosts lurk on the grounds, or that stories of cults have done the rounds. Overgrown foliage strangles the remaining buildings. Rust creeps up the sides of the canopy, and their graffiti reminds us of a property that once thrived among the twisted branches at Patapsco Valley State Park. Number 6. Now we take a road that diverges along the outer areas of Joshua Tree National Park. The two lanes travel along the desert branch of Interstate 10, and they stop at the entrance to Eagle Mountain. Eagle Mountain is California's very own ghost town. The town arose from the arid foliage in the late 1940s, with the idea of thriving for a generation or two. Industrialist Henry J. Kaiser created the city to support iron ore mining. It experienced a mining boom, and the community thrived. But when the mining industry met its decline, the mine had to close. In 1982, the town's grocery store shut its doors, and the post office soon followed suit. Paired with job loss and a lack of essential services, the population began to dwindle. In June of 1983, the last graduates celebrated, and the residents were forced to leave. While it may look dry and barren, Eagle Mountain is far from empty. The white-walled houses were once the residence of some 4,000 inhabitants. It was complete with an elementary, middle, and high school. There were medical facilities, a mall, and 8 churches sporadically placed along the dusty dirt. But now all that remains are desolate streets and empty walls. It didn't take long for fences to be put up all along the town, and the gates were closed for good. Ever since the 80s, this bustling community has been frozen in time. No green garden, refreshing pools, or cars adorn this land anymore, and it was marked as a ghost town. The community of Eagle Mountain, though, was far from ordinary. It was a company town, and the moment the man who owned everything decided that the mines were no longer a source of income, everyone had to go. Within the danger-exuding barbed wire are houses varying in condition. Some are entirely neglected, while others stand in mint condition. Some buildings adorn large holes, boarded-up windows, or floors covered in dirt, debris, and dust. What seemed odd about this small town is that every house is almost identical. Each was a single-story bungalow with a kitchen, bedrooms, and a bathroom. The city seemed somewhat ordinary, but the unwelcoming fence, the foreman on guard, and the warning sound firing off into the air tell a different kind of story. One urban explorer took the risk to venture out to this ghost town in the middle of nowhere. While unpacking his gear, he made commentary on the hills have eyes atmosphere that the village gives off. Exploring with Josh and his crew were able to peek through the windows and see old-school trophies locked behind their display cases. Inside the building, they found more trophies, lacrosse nets, clothing, and other equipment. Remnants of what the school, residents, parents, and students neglected to take along with them upon their evacuation. Adding to the eeriness of this abandoned town were the other discoveries that the YouTubers made, such as the hopscotch layout that was painted on the road and a pair of water goggles. But then they stumbled upon something that again tells a different story than just a no longer profitable town. On one of the doors of a residential building was a sticker warning of the biohazard dangers that may be inside the house. It adorned the alarming note of biosafety level 9. Old firearm shells were also discovered there, and again the idea of stay away was instilled. We may never know the truth about what truly happened at Eagle Mountain, or why it's being so heavily guarded. Large red trucks have also become a regular sighting in the area, and a for sale sign lies eerily at the entrance. Number 5. Located in Italy is a modern Pompeii known as Fossa. This town sits close to a large city in central Italy, both of which have a rich history and have been inhabited for hundreds of years. It was once the home of many people until an earthquake struck. On April 6, 2009, the ground shook at a 6.3 on the Richter scale. The earthquake stemmed from the faulting of the northwest-southeast trending Bannack fault. It's this fault, along with its neighbors, that is related to the tectonic forces associated with the Tyrrhenian Basin opening. This aftershock of this incredible earthquake sent ripples through Italy, in which public and political nerves became frayed. Millions of dollars worth of damage overtook the land. Roads, railways, bridges, tunnels, electricity, water supply, and sewer lines were damaged in the process. Businesses and homes were at the point of collapse and were deemed uninhabitable. Efforts to assist those who were left homeless began in September of that year. Thousands of them had to be placed in temporary facilities. Once evacuated, the historic center was restricted while restoration efforts slowly progressed. But officials involved in this reconstruction effort were investigated for wrongdoing. Thousands of years ago, Fossa was built up along a mountainside, and it took just one night for it to become abandoned entirely. While the residents were fast asleep in their beds at 3:32 a.m., a tragic event unfolded. Residents recall how the violent shaking of their homes woke them. Loud bangs and blasts rang through their ears as rubble tumbled all around, and cars crashed into one another. The sounds of twisting metal, shattering windows, collapsing buildings, and screams of the injured emitted throughout the town. Half of the 20,000 inhabitants were left without a home following the event, one of Italy's most fatal natural disasters. The town was promptly evacuated, and for the next couple of years the buildings would sit empty, neglected, and collapsing. In some of the areas of the town, the still standing structures are thought to be too risky to ever return to, and so thousands of residents were forced to leave their whole lives behind. None of the former residents of Fossa were allowed back in, and the decay had begun to set in. Some explorers have since set foot into the town, and how rapidly the townsfolk evacuated soon became apparent. A large Mickey Mouse plush toy still sat where its family left it. Dishes and glassware served as a reminder that someone once lived there, along with the intricately designed furniture. These buildings were overtaken with mold and debris. The homes looked as though they were waiting for their inhabitants to return one day, but this would never happen. The hollowed-out walls continued to collapse, and the roads became overgrown with moss as nature reclaimed the land. Fossa is one town that remains uninhabited from the quake that struck it almost 20 years ago. Number 4. Welcome to Gormanston, a mining town that can be found in the mountains of Tasmania's Wild West. This place was once home to a population of 2,000 people. It had its own school, courthouse, jail, and 8 different pubs. By the 1920s, though, Gormanston's population began to decline after the Iron Blow mine, which was located nearby, was phased out. Ralph Burns, the oldest surviving inhabitant, was interviewed by one news outlet. He walked the streets, pondering where certain buildings used to be, buildings that have now been reduced to dust. When he was young and living in the town, it was already past its heyday. By this time, only 2 of the 8 pubs were still open. But now, the 78-year-old sees how different it is from the bustling mining town that he recalls it being. The town was initially built for Mount Lyell Mining and Railway Company for the Iron Blow copper mine on the slopes of a mountain known as Mount Owen. The buzzing hub later waned and people departed, buildings were moved, and the town was left to crumble. The structures that remain serve as a testament to a bygone era. In 1979, the post office closed its doors and the buildings became weary. The panes shattered and the town became a chamber of forgotten echoes. A disaster had also taken place nearby, which may have influenced the decline of Gormanston. It was called the North Mount Lyell disaster, one of Australia's most significant disasters in history. It was 1912 when a fire raged through the catacombs of the copper mine. The alerts reached the mine workers far too late, and the tragedy was not without fatalities. It was here that a note was found written to the wife of Joe McCarthy. In the note, he told her goodbye, pleased that he was able to make a provision for her and his child, Lorna. These were his final words before perishing near the town of Gormanston. The ghost town now houses a few residents who decided to move in there. One individual headed there to meet one such resident, Luke. They stopped half a kilometer away from the town and honked their horn. The residents could hear it. The abandoned place has very little activity, and any sound will betray an outsider's presence. Peeling timber and iron reveal the gaping holes in the walls of the hall. As 2 visitors rolled in, the noise of gravel crunched beneath their tires, and the quietness of the streets rang piercingly in the air. Rabbits overtook the town along with greenery. The visitors snapped some pictures of the collapsing hall, images that would later curiously disappear. 2 days later, following their return from the creepy ghost town, Luke called up one of the visitors and told him that a former Gormanston local recited the story of 7 ghosts that roamed the streets. He suggested that this may explain the missing photographs. If there were a place for more than 40 unfortunate souls to escape the tunnels of the smoldering Mount Lyell, this town would be it. Number 3. Along Highway 61 in southern Alberta, the ghostly cries of the prairie winds are heard. The hum serves as a mournful reminder of the 20th century attempts at prosperity. In October of 1912, the post office of Needmore, Alberta opened. In May of 1916, the name was changed to Orion, which was named after the constellation. From the Badlands, this town arose, boasting over 30 flourishing businesses, a hotel, a bank, 4 grain elevators, and a population of 250. Many of the inhabitants were homesteaders, people relocating to the free land that the government was offering. In exchange for these free plots, they would have to live off the land, which many of them were able to do in the early stages. Crops were plentiful here until the prolonged drought, dust storms, and grasshoppers came to plague the land, and the homesteaders began to depart in groups. Alberta is known for its scenic attractions, such as mountains, lakes, and forests. It offers incredibly breathtaking sights, but the town of Orion offers more of a creepy side. Numerous abandoned towns and storefronts can be found all over this plot, places that are certain to send shivers down the spine. These buildings have long been forgotten about, and the townsfolk left many of their belongings behind, adding to the eeriness of the place. The tiny hamlet was reduced to a population of 7, but the streets are empty and the houses are at points of decay. Broken furniture has been found all around Orion, along with shoes and other items left in homes. These remnants serve as a reminder that this abandoned town was once flourishing with life and joy. The town sees the odd traveler here and there, who's hoping to catch a glimpse of the paranormal ongoings that may haunt it. The only thing confirmed to wander the forgotten streets is an original resident, Boyd Stevens. He once owned the local hardware store for many years, prior to the abandonment and the fire that turned the store to ash. A news outlet also interviewed Stevens, and he explained that this was the place he wanted to be. The then 77-year-old detailed the events that took place back in the 40s, when the inhabitants began to gather their things and head out. Stevens is not an extra who missed the last train out of there. He chose to remain in the ghost town. It's where he wanted to be. Life here, though, is not the average Western movie. The last inhabitant wears no firearm on his belt or a Stetson on his head, but instead carries a cane and wears a baseball hat as he makes his way through the streets. For decades, the man has served as a guardian of the ghosts and the unofficial mayor of the abandoned town, along with the Redcoat Trail. He knows that the final moments of the town are drawing to a close, but there he will remain until its very end. The Redcoat Trail is another piece of history linked to this ghost town. It's a land trail that the Northwest Mounted Police established. Their bright uniforms resulted in the name of the route. It starts in Saskatchewan and meanders west to the Alberta border with the Cypress Hills. Rusted trailers, old trucks, dilapidated houses, and rotting wood decorate the expanse. There's a surreal feeling to the rust and damp wood that is released into the atmosphere. Number 2. Kathmandu, a city steeped in history, lies in the Kathmandu Valley of Nepal. An original building still stands there and was used as a place for holy men. It also served as the seat for the Shah family from 1768 up until 2008. Kathmandu would become the most important business and commercial centers. In the 1970s, it saw new construction of roads and the expanse of air service. The city, once a bustling hub for national transportation, was a sight to behold. In 1992, workers were digging a trench for the foundation of a building in Kathmandu when they happened upon a life-sized male figure. It was carved from pale sandstone using a Kushan style. The figure had been a gift from a Lichavi monarch. Historians argued that this may have been a sculpture of the monarch himself. It's this creation that was found to be one of the oldest artifacts of the city. Unfortunately, though, many of the artifacts and original builds were destroyed, and the city was soon deemed a ghost town. This came after the events that took place in April of 2015. It was that year that an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 hit Nepal, 50 miles from Kathmandu. It was a fatal natural disaster, with the number of fatalities and injuries rising further the rescue workers went. Aftershocks caused further displacement and damage, leaving tens of thousands of residents homeless. A state of emergency was declared, and the local army was brought in to aid in the evacuation. This left the city vacant and in a state of decay. Foliage overtook parts of the town, and rubble was left in place, but the dust eventually settled down. Journalists with one news outlet explored the abandoned town. They reported that one of the busiest sectors of the city stands empty, while signage is misplaced on the streets. Television sets, lonely shoes, bricks, and more are reminders of when people once lived there. Freelance journalist Varun Nair took a trip through the town. He didn't find a single resident, and the only hint of life was the sounds of birds chirping. But in the midst of the brick dust and rubble was Lama Mokhtan's property, the last resident of Kathmandu. Lama owns one of the last hotels that has been left standing there. He refuses to leave his town behind and is willing to house any visitors or travelers who journey through this forgotten ghost town. He recalled the events of that fateful day. Building materials came crashing down, preventing him and his family from exiting through the front door. They were forced to use an alternative exit and jump over into the neighbor's property as they watched the city collapse around them. Trying to get to the hotel is a challenging venture. Other buildings are passed by on the way, all of which are vacant and destroyed. Lama remains hopeful that people will one day return, but it's almost been 10 years since the event, and the city has remained uninhabited. At the same time, nature continues to wrap around what remains, causing further destruction and collapse. Those who once lived in this city refuse to return out of fear. The events that took place back in 2015 were a traumatic one that continues to haunt the former occupants. Number 1. During the 1800s, European settlers relocated to Canada after being offered free land by the government. The only condition was that they would need to set up their own working farm within just 1 year. A lot of these towns would be littered across places like Saskatchewan. One such place was Insinger. Insinger, named after Frederick Robert Insinger, a politician and rancher from Holland, was much like Orion. It started off as a farming community, but due to the poor and harsh conditions, resources dwindled. The intense winters and lack of sustainable crops inevitably led Insinger to be forgotten, abandoned, and become yet another prairie ghost town. In 1903, a railway was established in Insinger, and in 1908, a post office was formed. A railroad station would only be incorporated in 1920, and the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of the Descent of the Holy Ghost was erected in 1942. Between 1930 and 1960, this small town saw a population of over 100 people, the peak of which was 135 in 1956. The town boasted 4 stores, a hall, 2 garages, a cafe, and a hotel by 1955, and by 1960 the decline began. It started with the closure of the school in 1967, and by 1971 the population was 72. 5 years later, it was reduced to 56, and 5 years after that, it was just 39. The grain elevators were demolished in 1999, and Insinger was deemed a ghost town, left to wither away. One urban explorer stumbled upon the forgotten land. Dave, the photographer from Ontario, is known as Freaktography online. He shared his exploration video with his over 88,000 YouTube subscribers, in which he pointed out all the abandoned buildings scattered across the landscape of Insinger. This hollowed-out village's church is among the forgotten buildings. It was small with no windows and had an eerie look to it. The town is located off Saskatchewan Highway 16, where cars zoom by on a daily basis, overlooking the creepy village and abandoned buildings. The buildings haven't been entirely untouched. Graffiti decorates the walls, lending to the scary atmosphere that the place gives off. Most of the items have been cleared out of the buildings, with only small clues that it was once inhabited. Freaktography also takes us on a journey to some of the residential houses still standing there. Some of the wood has become damp and damaged, but the town remains well preserved. Oddly though, the town's office was still being used, and so was the postal office. The town and the farms surrounding it have a population of under 20 people. It also seemed as though the abandoned village was not so lifeless as it appeared, as one house that stood there had been engulfed in flames, reduced to ash without any apparent cause. There were plants placed in the south window. They were brown but thought to have been placed there more recently since they hadn't withered away. Upon closer inspection, a sink area had also been set up in the house, and half a bag of cat food and a tended to litter box were seen on the floor. The next hint that this ghost town was partially abandoned was the discovery of a can that had no dust on it. Insinger was once the home of settlers and farmers, but as the trials of life worsened slowly, they began to depart, leaving nothing more than the shell of a town behind. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.